year is this?
91? Is Kaiji still there? This is, if you know about Kaiji and Japan, this was like the last one with Kaiji. This is right before the on the version instruction shows. Yeah, especially now. Like, I mean, at this point in the video, I'm sure it's not everything works. It is.
Like even Gazette, they have like this very short
Yeah.
They included the makeup artist. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Get your girl like that. As far as I'm concerned, extra was really only really awesome when Kaiji and Vita is still there. What? Yeah. I know, yeah, balloons. Those are balloons. Oh, I was so sorry. I didn't play the pilot now. Everything's like, oh, you have your suggestions instead. I guess you did a different show by now after. I mean, I still have time to answer. I'll bite her. Yeah, for those who can't tell, he just says, you know, it's why we describe a visual shock. It's accented. Yeah. Which is, of course, how we get the term VKei. People, but thank you all for coming to Visual VKei 101, History of Visual Shock. We'll just jump right into this. Introduce to my far left.
Hello, my name is Heidi. I normally do more of idle stuff, and that's why I'm so pink today. But I also really love Visual VKei. Sort of fan of Visual VKei, other Visual VKei stuff as well. And yeah, I do podcasts with AJ and hopefully some translation stuff in the future. Yeah, nice to meet you.
And then to my left.
My name's Tom. I'm more specialized in the darker heavy metal of VKei, so I'm not too familiar with the other stuff, but yeah.
Yes.
Very broad visual canis menu.
And my name's Manuel. I head AJ Connections. We do all these panels. Now, to be fair, we talk about what we're really into. To be totally fair, and even this, we do idle panels too. I'm more the old school person. I'm the one who knows the older stuff. I don't know too many of the newer stuff. A lot of that to look up. So we're going to go over everything this time. So we're all from A2J Connections. Check us out. Website a-2-j-connections.com. This is what's going to. We're also on Facebook, facebook.com/A2J-connections. Heidi mentioned we have a podcast. We do that every week, but every other week is the music one. It's on our Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/A2J-plays. You can find all that information on our website as well, and on our Facebook. So we'll just jump right into this. What is Visual VKei? Now I threw these pictures together because this is a nice segue between the bands from the early days to the 90s to 2000s. We'll cover all this. So, the very first thing, is it a genre? Right?
Yes and no. It's like Visual VKei, there's a music element of it, there's also the fashion element of it, so it's both a style and a genre.
Exactly.
The genre is also like, it's rock, it's like all kinds of rock and metal and all kinds of other things too, so kind of hard to define.
Exactly. At its core, Visual VKei, to break down the word itself, visual is obviously visual, and K just means style or system, so when you throw those together, it's literally visual style. And the idea is, and even in terms of like how the name came to be, which we'll talk a bit more as we go on, it's meant to more refer to the look and not so much the sound. Because there are many genres within what we call Visual VKei. So what makes a band Visual VKei? Only from Japan. No, I don't know if you had time to watch the clip I uploaded of some of the non-Japanese Visual VKei inspired bands. What are your views on some of like bands who consist of Visual VKei who are Japanese?
I don't really know that much about them, but if
since Visual Kei more refers to the look, I mean, a lot of the other bands, they pull up the look really well, and I do think they look really cool. I just personally am not a fan of the sound. I really like the Japanese lyrics. I like there's a certain, like some bands will say there's a certain, even though Visual Kei is not a genre of music, there's a certain element that a lot of bands kind of have in common, and a lot of the foreign bands don't have that hard to describe kind of theme.
That takes us to the sound of Visual Kei. There definitely is something like uniquely Japanese about it, for lack of a better way to describe it. And a lot of bands don't quite capture that, but we'll show you some examples later on. A lot of very common thing that makes a band Visual Kei is hair, makeup, and fashion, as you might know. The androgynous look. This kind of started more in the mid-90s and has definitely continued on. And it's kind of had its moments where it's been a little over the top. We get members like Hizaki from Versailles and other bands like that have like Mana from Wadi Swan, Alice Miser, pretty much are like all girl all the time in terms of their look. But yeah. And J-Rock versus Visual Kei, this is a very interesting thing. People like mention like, oh, like they're not Visual Kei, they're J-Rock. At its core, most music that is considered Visual Kei would technically still be J-Rock, because it's still just Japanese rock. And before we go into all the crazy genres that exist, we should also point out that a lot of that, take it with a grain of salt, because genres are a very interesting thing in terms of that they can be created all over the place. And one of the questions that we will talk about as time goes on is Visual Kei still exists today? Because you look at X Japan, the clip we just showed earlier, there definitely aren't really that many bands that sound like that anymore. And they definitely don't really look like that anymore. But we'll go into that. Now this is the part that, I don't know how many of you are you familiar with either of these really old pre-VKei bands? Well, before Visual Kei, there was a thing called Okesho Kei. And do we know what Okesho means, anyone? I know, 2 Japanese speakers raise their hand. Hi, what does Okesho mean?
Makeup.
Yes. So going back to the word Kei, it means the makeup style. Basically, it was a very 80s thing. You know, we had hair metal, glam metal going on here. Sound was very similar to those. I had some clips from them, but it's not really important, so I cut them out. There was no term visual. So a lot of bands that we consider Visual Kei later on, who we'll go into in a second, they existed in this period before the term existed. So 2 bands, Loudness and Dead End. Loudness is definitely like a very 80s metal band. They had big success in the US, but they're very important to the movement because a lot of, they had the look that was very similar to bands at the time. And of course, if you were fans of X Japan, you might know that the bassist Taiji ended up in Loudness after he left X Japan, or was kicked out, depending who you talk to. Now, Dead End is a very interesting band. I'm surprised you haven't heard of them because they've gotten a lot of fame lately. A lot of people like to talk about them as they were the first Visual Kei band. And if you look online, the people who say this, and I actually went to another panel when people were talking about this, the thing about that is, and I'll just go into this really fast, is that there may be bands before X Japan who sounded like them, looked like them, did things like them, but they're not Visual Kei because X Japan literally created Visual Kei, literally created it with the name as being called Visual Kei. So there'll be some sources that mention Dead End and but what's funny about Dead End is like they weren't that popular. They lasted a very short amount of time, but they reformed recently, and a lot of bands have been like, oh yeah, they were an influence on us. It's kind of been a new thing to like kind of talk about. Oh, Dead End were the VKei before there was VKei. But brief history of Visual Shock, looking at some early bands, going back to what is Visual Kei, it developed in the late 80s, 90s. We're moving on beyond the words, so basically focus on elaborate makeup, costume, stage antics. Now it came from the term, which is why I mentioned X Japan, is they had a slogan, which you might have heard at the end of that live clip we showed earlier, where it was psychedelic violence crime of visual shock. Literally that is what we get Visual Kei from. Shock's magazine in 1992 called the genre for the very first time Visual Shock Kei. And as you might imagine, as time went on, the shock part left. Visual Kei is born. Heavily inspired by Western bands. Basically, they took the Okesho Kei thing and made it a bit different. You might notice the makeup of a glam metal band is very like, like Poison or Rat or Motley Crue. But when you get to the VKei side of things, there's a kind of a kabuki-inspired thing with the makeup, and the hair is a bit more crazy. So there's a difference. X Japan being the first visual kei band. And interesting to note that at the time, when visual kei was like at its boom, it was a very dominant genre. We did it kind of earlier, we talked about these dynamics. X Japan was a huge band. They sold a ton of records. They were on Kohaku, the year, the end of the year show. They performed there many times. Lunacy was there. These were huge bands. Now it's not quite the thing. They're a bit more of a niche, definitely. The first visual kei bands, to throw them out there, X Japan, Bucktick, Danger Color. There were several others, just are the examples. It's important to note that all these bands, including X Japan, existed long before the term came to be. And we all throw Bucktick in that thing, because you know Bucktick, because they're still around. But basically, a lot of these bands kind of got lumped into the genre, so to speak. That happens when any genre becomes popular than other bands who happen to look like them. Some of these bands, if you actually talk to them and whatnot, if you read old interviews, they mention, oh, we're not visual kei, we're this other genre, which goes back to how genres are a very messy thing. And it's very important to note that these bands come from very different genres. Bucktick has been all over the place. They do punk, they do new wave, they do, just alternative rock. Ranger is very punk, and Color is just they do pop and they do punk and they do hardcore stuff. So we're gonna watch some nice early clips. Bucktick is definitely one of the most famous of the bands that early visual kei movement that they existed long before it. I know everyone loves Atsushi, he's the hot one, yeah. The video's supposed to be like that. Yeah, no, yeah, it's just cheesy effects. If you pay attention, there's actually there's a very unique sound to early visual kei bands. They all kind of had this aspect to them. I don't have to put a finger on the Ranger sound. A lot of the other bands sounded like that. So, anyways, moving on to the bands that actually were the true forerunners of visual kei. They were known as X Japan. They were formed by Yoshiki and Toshi, the vocalist, and Yoshiki, of course, is the drummer. You might know him because he's all over the place these days. Their style is very much like a speed thrash metal type sound, but they're known for doing a lot of ballads. Everyone knows Endless Rain if you're a big fan, So yeah, the album Blue Blood, which is the album that had the psychedelic visual shocks logo put on there, was basically the album that created visual kei. If anyone wants to look up a really cool album cover, look up their first album cover. It's called Vanishing Vision, and it's an amazing album cover that I cannot show here because it's kind of extreme. In 1992, they had a big shakeup where the original bassist was left or was fired, depending who you asked. They had a change in image. They pretty much stopped doing a normal tour. All the people went solo, and they changed the name to X Japan. They broke up and reformed, of course. Talk a bit more about that. And now they're pretty much as big as before, but there's some major key differences that we'll talk about in a minute. Now, Lunacy is the other band that kind of really defined early visual kei. They formed as Lunacy, still pronounced the same way, but spelled differently. Discovered by Hide in 1991. And their sound is all over the place as well. I'll show you a clip of one of their older songs. They definitely were a lot more punk, and now they're a bit more of just your standard alt-rock band. They're pretty much known as the other visual kei, founding band, and they're hugely successful, broke up in 2000, and they too have reformed and showed new material. So if anyone ever asks who were the first two big visual kei bands, you know they're X Japan and Lunacy. And if you watch a new video of them, they don't look anything like this anymore. I love this concert because, like, look at the back row and just doesn't really give a care what's going on. Like, a couple years after this video, like, Lunacy would be one of the biggest bands that, you know, were sought after, and they would also play Oakland with like Japan, so. It's just, like, funny how, like, I just love that, like, you can see where, like, the fans stop. But yeah. So moving on, before we jump into like all the current stuff, we got to talk about the growth, expansion, and fall of Visual Kei. Because yes, Visual Kei did have a really big, noticeable fall. First of all, we're talking about two big record labels that defined early Visual Kei. One was Ecstasy Records by Yoshiki, the drummer from X Japan, and it was based in Tokyo. Now that's important because we're talking about the other label in a second. Their early artists were Ladies Room, Jekyll. Jekyll you might know because when they broke up, the drummer from Jekyll is now the current drummer for Larkin Seal. Tokyo Yankees, the Zolj, Glay was one of the early bands, and of course Lunacy. They moved to the US, the label moved to the US when Yoshiki moved here, and the label doesn't really exist, especially as a Japanese label. There's artists on it, of course X Japan's on it, but they don't really do Visual Kei music anymore, it's really sad. They do a lot of American artists and some European ones. Now the other big label, which we'll talk a bit more at this panel, by the way, one of the things about this panel was like, I'm trying to move everything fast, there's so much to talk about. We chose to like showcase different parts, but if you see our panel other places, we might talk more about Ecstasy. So Free Will is the other big label, and it's headed by Dynamite Tommy. He's the vocalist for a band Color, and they're based out of Osaka. Now the whole thing was, it was like an East versus West rivalry going on, you know, kind of East Coast rappers and, you know, West Coast rappers kind of thing, where it was like, you know, the bands in Osaka were like rivals against the bands from Tokyo. Now, a lot of the early Free Will artists were Color, Bisexual, one of my favorite bands by the way. Some people might know them, funny enough, mentioning Larkin Seal. Larkin Seal's original drummer, the one who was picked up for drug reasons, ended up in Bisexual, so he's like, they're called Bisex now, and he's in that band. Kamaitachi, Genkoku Allergy, Beelzebub, ton of cool bands. And Dirt Gray is of course their most famous band. They still exist now. Ichini Zero Ichini is one of their other huge bands. Mary, Lizard, they have tons of bands. And people might know them as they produced the anime Grappler Baki in 2001. And there were some really cool Visual Kei songs on that album. But let's watch a couple clips real fast. I love this song from Color because it's so unlike the rest of the songs. And that's Dynamite Tommy, by the way. Yeah, cool. I know. If you listen to the rest of the stuff, it's very punk. I really love Bisexual. They're one of my favorite bands like of all time. They're also one of the bands that are really hard to look up. You start typing in bisexual, or even bisexual Japanese band. Try type in bisexual Japanese band, and you won't really find them that easily. They won't be the first ones who show up. They have a really good sound, very punk. They sound very much like an early Lunacy and early Bucktick, and really good album. Check them out if you get some time. I'm plugging Bisexual for some reason. Hide. Now, you can't really talk about the early days of Japan. Anyone not know who Hide is? Oh, really? Okay. So,
I'm really buzzed.
Hide was born as Matsumura Hideto. He was a guitarist for X Japan. He was a soloist as Hide, and he was also known as Hide with Spread Beaver later on. And he was the co-founder of the US Japanese band Zilch. He is an icon of Visual Kei. His style is all over the place, more so than any other band. And we're talking about within a small body of music. some of his songs were straight rock. Some of them were like, he had like big band stuff, and then some of them were like ska elements, and then so electronic and industrial. Very all over the place within the same albums. Zilch was set to tour the US. They were set to open for Marilyn Manson. It was going to be this huge thing where it was going to be the first Japanese like band, VKei, to do this. Now it's also important to point out that as X Japan went on, they took away the VKei look, but Hide pretty much retained it. And that style like stayed with them, and he's pretty much the only artist of that early era who kept the VKei look alive. But he died in 1998. The anniversary of his death just passed relatively recently, actually. I mean, it's coming up relatively recently, sorry. And it was ruled a suicide. It's a very complicated issue. The band say it wasn't a suicide. Taiji wrote his biography, his memoir, that it was a stress, because he was found like hanging by a towel on a doorknob, and they said it was a stress relieving thing, and he fell. Either way, it was a big deal. He died. Several people committed suicide with him. Fans. Tons of people went to his funeral. It was a huge thing. And what was very weird, I don't want to talk too much about he didn't go on about this, but what was very weird about his death was that it became a pop culture thing. He was working on 2 albums. How much of his contributions to those albums actually was him is debatable. But either way, both albums were finished. The Zilch album and his last album as Hide, with Spread Beaver. They were released. Suddenly his singles were selling tons of copies. Everyone was buying them. The band Spread Beaver went on their tour. He wasn't going to go on tour with them. He was going to go to the US. But the band went on tour without him. And they used the video thing behind them to when they were playing the songs. And it was a very weird thing that they just kept going on even though he was dead. They literally kept going on. And yeah, there was a famous quote at the time, and it was a US guy who was an author who was talking about Japan just rather than mourning his death, they went from mourning it to consuming it in terms of consumer goods. But yeah, we'll talk a bit more about how his death was important. But first, we're gonna watch some clips of him in case you don't know, you haven't heard his music. And some fans say that the song Please Spider was kind of his suicide note. He talked about sentences in his life and all these other odd concepts that people were oh, this is this was a song that was released right before his death. But pretty much VKei as we know it, the early days, stopped at the end of the 90s. So there's a few reasons why. There was pretty much several things built up on each other. First, X Japan broke up in 1997. Then Hide died the next year. A lot of people, bands, fans, everyone kind of points to this as the end of the era. Similar to when the plane crash took Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and all them. It was a similar thing. When the day Rock died in the US, it was considered the day VKei ended. And there were other notable deaths at the time too. We're talking the late 90s or 2000s. The drummer from Malice Miser, Kami died. The guitarist from Raphael, his name escapes me. He OD'd on drugs. And there was this huge thing, all the band members were dying. And then Lunacy, while all this was happening, Lunacy broke up too. So basically, a lot of these bands formed other bands. All of them pretty much as a rule ditched the VKei look. The singer from Lunacy became a pop singer, an adult-oriented pop singer. It was the weirdest thing ever. Doing ballads aimed at middle-aged women. It was the weirdest thing to ever see. Imagine that singer earlier with the long curly hair and just doing crooning ballads. And yeah, like I said, deaths of a lot of popular members. And it's also notable that except if you're VKei releasing a posthumous release, the large commercial entity that was VKei was no longer happening. New bands were coming, but they weren't selling the way they used to. And there was a new generation of bands. So before we move further about other bands, we're talking about some cool aspects beyond the music. Did I go back? Yeah. So, the VKei fandom. Now the fandom is mostly female. It's, at least in Japan. What are your views on that? Why do you think that is? Just out of curiosity, Heidi, asking the only people on this panel.
I think it's kind of because like visual kei is kind of like it's kind of like an opposite of with idols in Japan, like female idols. How female idols fans are mainly male, who like kind of idolize them and kind of picture themselves being with the member at some time. The female fans also kind of like idolize the members of the band because they have like a look that is inspiring to them. You know, it's not really a male look, it's an androgynous look that they can aspire to, and they also can have like the same kind of, oh, maybe one day I can possibly, through going to all of these shows, buying all their CDs, showing up at all of their events, maybe someday they will notice me and I can be with them, that kind of aspect to it.
Funny you mentioned that. I remember I had a friend who was really into Miyavi, and like I remember she wrote this big long post. It was actually on MySpace. That's how long ago this happened. When he got married, she posted this long post about like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna stop supporting him because now, you know, he's married and he's like off the market. And she had this whole, no, she legit had this whole thing. I know it's stupid, but I legit had this dream that he would come and like to the US and see me at a concert and like fall madly in love with me. And she was being totally honest and like marry her, and now that's never gonna happen, so she stopped liking him. Weirdest thing ever. But that happens. Fandom is very weird in Japan. It's very gender-based split in terms of how things go. It's really diverse elsewhere. You can't really explain what a bangal is, bangaru?
Not too familiar.
Oh, you're really not? You familiar with the concept? Yeah.
It's like I was saying earlier, it's kind of like the female version of an ota for visual kei band.
Yeah.
Someone who like goes to all the concerts, goes to all the events, buys all the CDs for a band they like. Usually they're very like dedicated to just one band, and they look down on fans who like other bands, or if someone says like they like one member and then they suddenly decide to say they like something about another member, they're like, excuse me? Or like if a band suddenly gets popular from a song through like anime or something, they'll be like, oh, you just like this band because you just like this band because of that. You're not a real fan. Get out. Yeah, they're kind of mean.
They are. They're definitely does this exist in idol concerts too, by the way, before I move further? Like the hierarchy of fans, like some fans are above others. Yeah, because that exists in the VKei world, by the way. There's a hierarchy of fans where like if you go to a show, a VKei show especially, and there's like a mob of the band gals there, usually you have to be in cool with them to get towards the front, or you know, unless there's some shows that are ticketed in terms of spot, but if it's like kind of a free-for-all, you kind of have to be in with them if you want to go near the band. And sometimes there's rules to follow. You know, there's like a head, you know, band. It's a very weird thing. Usually, I went to a couple shows. Actually, I went to Japan a while back, and I went to a couple shows, and I remember it was such a weird concept. I was like, I'm fine going back. It was just too hard to contemplate. So yeah, also similar to WOTA activities like in idol culture, there's very similar like hand movement things you do like at VKei concerts. I don't have an example of it, but it's very similar. You know, just coordinated movements that happen because.
We're going to be showing a clip of a song from Sid called Mosoniki, and it's very famous for having like, there's a whole coordinated dance that like all the fans know for it.
Oh really?
Yeah, that's the reason why there's like so many different bands performing it with them, is because like it's their most famous song, everyone knows like that song and like the movements for it. And there's even an idol group up there dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really fun clip where you can get to it. There's but yeah, it's coordinated dance movements. Fandom is very different in Japan, but so there's a lot of cosplays. You got some pictures of it there, and I skipped some earlier of some members of VKei. If you go to a lot of these shows, you'll see fans cosplaying. You see it a lot, especially like in foreign shows. You see it in Japan too, but you see it a lot here. Concert etiquette. I mentioned how there's a lot of like movement stuff. A lot of VKei shows are like, I don't know if this like really goes to other things, but like if there's like a mosh, usually a very polite mosh, I don't know how else to put it. I think it has to do with just Japan. Yeah, usually like when you mosh, it's a very polite thing, and you kind of like just move a bit, like mosh, knocking into people. But then when it's done, you all go back to your original pose, like that you had earlier, and you kind of just go back to your coordinated movements. And yeah, there's a very odd concert etiquette going on in Japan. It's just, but anyways, visual kei aesthetics. So there's a lot of influence like in shoujo manga's aesthetics in visual kei, especially in the 90s. There's a very famous anime that came out in the 70s. Oh, actually, it's a manga, anime, so on. There's a live action movie, Versailles Novara, which is the Rose of Versailles. I think it's finally released in the US officially. It's very influential with a lot of visual kei fans, because if you know the plot, it's a female who is masquerading as man, who's involved in relationships with both males and females. So it's kind of like a weird, like, there's both yaoi and yuri type, like, you know, like, elements going on in there. And there's a bit of that in terms of the androgynous look. A lot of bands, like, point to that, like Kamijo from Versailles, members of Alice Miser point to that as, like, you know, an aesthetic thing, which we'll talk about a bit more, that defined a lot of the 90s. Another very early thing is the glam hair metal style, which we saw in a lot of the bands. And then now, you get a lot more of the high fashion, street fashion type thing. A lot of bands do a lot of stuff with designers and whatnot. So you kind of get the cool looking bands, stuff like that. Cross-dressing and gender bending. It's a very interesting thing. You see it a lot, like fan service. Does anyone know what fan service is? Doesn't know what fan service is? Okay, you know, so it's basically like, you know, bands who just, you know, do things to please their fans, like kiss each other and, like, you know, do simulated sexual acts and stuff like that. There's very much a Bishonen, like, boy, like pretty boy and a yaoi type thing going on, which is another aspect of why there's a very heavy female fandom to it. This is definitely not the case across the board, but it's the case in a lot of bands. And I talked to a lot of fans, and they're like, oh my god, I love, like, you know, Hizaki, and I love Mana, and I love, like, other, you know, I love Kaya, because they're like, they're more pretty than me, and other people say that, kind of like, girls say this. So there's like all this weird, like, you know, aesthetic, you know, going on there. Visual kei fashion. This is also very, very huge. There's lots of fashion brands, Asian Now 06, Black Beast Now, Six Revenge, Go. A lot of these brands, I mean, some of these brands, is Black Beast Now still around? I don't know if they're still active. They are? Okay, yeah. Like, I'm not a fashion, you know, person, so I don't really know. And there's a lot of brands that are, of course, created and supported by, you know, these bands. Lena Fashion, especially when we talk about the Tom VKei bands and, you know, all the ones you mentioned before, is very important.
Oh my god.
And then, of course, there's Oshada Fashion, which we'll talk about a bit later. And there's some elements of cosplay with some bands, which we'll cover as well. Just keep that in mind, and there's lots of crossover. Now, I used to end the panels with this, but I thought it was better to move this up. Visual kei around the world. Does anyone know? Oh, I put that same picture in twice. It's in the panel. Does anyone know who the person is on the left? Does anyone know? His name is Yohyo. He's a guitarist from Sweden. He's really famous in terms of, like, Western visual kei because, well, look at him. Like, he doesn't look like. I could have mixed him in with the other pictures, and you probably wouldn't have known he's a guitarist from Sweden. He's very famous in Japan in terms of the visual kei scene. He was in a band. He was in some of the bands we're going to talk about. There's a band in the show later on called Daime, and a band called Kobera. He was the guitarist for that singer's original band. And there's a lot of things like that. There's a lot of bands around the world. And I mentioned Serenity. That's the band that Yohyo is in. That's him on the right. They're all Swedish, I should mention, that whole band. On the right is a band called Melrose. They're from Thailand. They're, of course, all Thai. Daime is the current band that is some of the members from Serenity. They're from Finland and Sweden. And on the right is Salem's Lot. They're from the USA. They're really awesome. They're kind of like friends of mine. I should point out that they're the only band that I'm showing here that has a Japanese member. Their bassist is Japanese, and I mean he's Japanese, barely speaks English. And they definitely have a very old school Visual Kei look and sound to them. They're very awesome, check them out. And you can check them out because they have a nice clip I put together of some of these bands. And you'll see what I mean, and the genres go all over the place as well, so check it out. And they've also opened for a lot of Japanese bands in the US. And Seiki, the singer from that band, is a friend of mine, and like I interviewed him a while back when he came to the U.S. And he's actually really huge in the VKei scene right now. We're doing a lot of these concerts that bring over bands from around the world to perform in Japan. And there's one going on in a couple weeks where a lot of U.S. bands, all those bands I just mentioned, except for Salem's Lot, are going to go there to Japan in a couple weeks. There's Lita Dark from LA, Phoenix Ash from LA, from San Francisco actually. Phoenix Ash from San Francisco, they're local here. And they're all going to perform in Japan at this VKei World Fest thing. What are your thoughts on that as you see the couple? Yeah. What do you think? What does everyone think? Really?
It's like American, yeah. And then, I mean, like for Sam's Life, it really sounded like.
Well, that was an odd choice. I actually asked them which one, because they have songs that sound a bit more like it, but they definitely, their sound is more, like I said, the old school thrashy sound that you saw in the early days. Like they do a lot of Loudness covers, they do Easy O covers in another early band. And like I said, they've opened for pretty much any band that's come, not they're not opening for set, but they opened for Loudness, they opened for Easy O, they opened for Marty Friedman who came over, they opened for several bands. They're pretty big in the scene too. But honestly, I think of all those, Melrose definitely sounds the most VKei, and it's cool because they're singing in Thai. So, anyways, moving on to the Kami 4. Sorry. Moving on to the Kami 4 of the 90s. So, are you familiar with the Kami 4 bands? I'm sure you have to know Malice Miser, you know. Yeah. There are 4 bands that were known as the Kami 4. Now, what made these bands important was that, of course, you had Lunar City and X Japan who were leading the thing, but these are 4 bands from 4 pretty radically different styles who kind of pushed the genre forward, who made sure it didn't just die, a slow death in the early 90s. Are you familiar with Shazna? So Shazna, is anyone familiar with Shazna? Because they're kind of, the sad thing about all 4 of these bands, by the way, let me back up a little. The 4 bands are Shazna, Fanatic Crisis, La Cribba Christie, and Malice Miser. We're not going to talk about La Cribba Christie or Fanatic Crisis here, but they are just as awesome. I especially love La Cribba Christie. All of these bands won Best New Artist awards. They sold millions of copies. They all have that iconic album, the iconic single. But Shazna is a band that was active from 1983 to 2000. Now you might notice these years all start after X Japan, so there's a reason why. The vocalist Izam is famous. First of all, he's very, very androgynous, very over the top, and you know it for him. You know it for that. They're known for the song "Melty Love," and their album "Gold Sun and Silver Moon," an amazing album that sold like over 1 million copies or close to 1 million copies. It was a huge album. They won the Best Newcomer Award, and there was a big thing at the time. He married Hinata Yoshikawa, who was, I believe, she was a pop singer. It's escaping me right now. It was this big thing. He married her. It was this huge like scandal for both of them. It was very sudden, and they divorced just as suddenly, like in weeks. And that's kind of what a lot of people know. Like, it was a huge thing. And this is like at the height of Shazna's fame, and a lot of people know he's obviously he became an actor shortly after that. And they reformed and they broke up. But here's that clip, "Melty Love," which is a big classic of 90s VKei. Yeah. It's also one of the songs that a lot of bands covered that's so iconic. Yeah. It's an oldie. Oh, it's an oldie. So yeah. And I already mentioned the Crim Christie and Fanatic Crisis, but the other big one is Malice Miser, who I'm sure everyone probably in this room and I'm sure on this panel, yeah, they're still around. We'll talk about that in a second. Tom VKei. They pretty much like define the early genre, where it's like, you know, the beauty, like the aesthetics one, very like Victorian inspired fashion. It's very interesting to note they had very distinct phases. And it's all thanks to the 3 vocalists. Everyone knows Gat. Everyone knows Gat. But they had 2 of the vocalists. Before Gat, they had a vocalist named Tetsu. After Gat, they had a vocalist named Haha. And their sound varied because of that. They were straight rock. They were definitely very like French Baroque sounding when they had Gat. And then when Klaha joined, they had a very, very, very like goth like sound. I don't know how to describe it. And also at that point, they had lost their drummer, Kami, because he had died. And there was this weird period where they were releasing music that hadn't like, not only didn't have an official drummer, but they had songs that like weren't traditional songs that had no drums. You know, some of them they weren't playing anything. It was just like symphonic type stuff. And so yeah, they're known for those 2 big things. That Kami died very suddenly, and then Gak left. And of course, everyone knows Gak because you know he became this huge superstar in his own right. And they broke up in 2001. Everyone will say they're on hiatus, but it's been 15 years. And like, yes, and it's like every time I mention this in the panel, like they're like, no, they're on hiatus, and I'm like, it's been 15 years. Of course, they've met up and they've done little things. They've never been together all at once, but you know, like Yuki has come over, played with both Cozy and Mana. Mana and Cozy have played things together, but the 3 of them have never come together, and they've never come together with any of the vocalists. So it's pretty much never going to happen. And it'll never happen because Tetsu has long moved on. He has a whole different sound. Klaha is retired, and Gat, I doubt, will ever move back to his Malice Miser days. And let's be honest, everyone just wants the Gat formation anyway. So, but speaking of that, if anyone wants to look this up, it's actually a nice movie that goes with this song, which is a crazy thing. Which is they're acting, all of the really things that are on that movie. Yeah. But there were other bands in the 90s. There was a second wave. Now, mind you, this is still going on concurrently before the big fall of, you know, in the early 2000s, the 2000s-ish. This is the period where we had the genre-defining bands. This is when visual kei went from being visual kei, and you started seeing, like I mentioned, the Tommy Kei. You started seeing, you didn't see Oshada yet, but you saw like all the other genres or would become the other genre. This is when During Gray started. This is when Loren started, other bands like that. So yeah, there were tons of bands that started to get. Fanatic Crisis, Silver Rose, Kurigoma, they of course started Nagoya Kei. This is the era of Shocks magazine. That's interesting to point out because Shocks magazine has definitely fallen on different times. They're not quite the big purveyors of visual kei as they used to be. And this is the period we saw a lot of the key deaths that I mentioned, and when we saw the subgenres. And when we started to see the bands that would be in the 2000s. And everyone probably knows this song, this gigantic song. This is the only song I really know. You don't know it? The key should cover sometimes. And there was a period where like a genre developed called soft kei, and they're kind of that. This isn't soft kei.
These men are all more beautiful than I am.
Yes.
Holy shit.
And some people might know some of the members from Raphael have gone to other bands. I want to say Rice is one of their. That was the one. There's a band called Rice. Yeah, I'm not making this up. I love Loren, I love Kamijo, and I love this song.
Yeah.
Nobody remembers this, but Kamijo was like founded it a few years back.
Yeah, like what's this?
And yeah, like it was like nobody seems to remember this. Nobody was really there for it, but like it was the most amazing thing ever. And he was there as Loren, even though it was like just him. But anyways, moving on to the 2000s. The 2000s of visual kei. This is a very interesting point. This is probably the period that a lot of people know, a lot of people are familiar with. There were new indie labels. Kisaki had a label. If anyone doesn't know what Kisaki is, does anyone know what Kisaki is? You know what Kisaki is? What's Kisaki?
I don't know how to describe him anymore.
But-
That guy and he has like a lot of labels and connections.
Exactly. He was the bassist. A lot of people might know him as he was the bassist for During Gray, when they were called the Sadies, before they were During Gray. There's people who say that he was dating Kyo's girlfriend, who knows what happened. But he was kicked out of the band, and then he was replaced with, oh my god, the name of the current bassist escapes me. But thank you! I can't believe it's During Gray, how the hell did I forget his name? But anyways, he formed several bands. He was solo, he had Kisaki Project. He was fantastic. He was in Phantasmagoria. He was currently with Lin. That was a more recent band. But yeah, he's huge, and he kind of, his label Undercode was kind of defined the early 2000s in visual kei. Free Will, once again, like they were always there, but in 2000s they really picked up again because During Gray was on their label. And Kamijo, we just saw earlier with Loren doing Fuyo Tokyo. He had his own label called Shero Artist Society. It's a bit more recent. And of course, Amana had his own label. Technically, I think it was just Mwadi Smoa and Schwartzstein, the band that Kaya was in, but he still had his own label. And you're familiar with Cure magazine? Yes. It is pretty much the current big visual kei magazine. It kind of took over from where Shocks was. Shocks is kind of like old people magazine. It's the magazine that people like East Japan and Mouse Miser go read. But Cure magazine is the one that for the new bands, the young bands, the hip bands. So there's very much a new image like for visual kei. And this image is kind of still going on now. Like a lot of these things are still here. And this is also where we saw the exposure of the West. Have you guys been to any visual kei concerts in the US? You've been to some. Oh yeah, J-Rock Revolution. I almost said that. That was a long time ago. You were a baby.
I was really short though.
Yes. It'll good okay. Now this is one of the big genres in the 2000s. I know you talked about this a lot in your panel that you did last year. Do you care to like give your take on what Edogudo is?
Well, I don't really consider it like something like lots of bands fall under, but they kind of touch upon.
Yes.
Because that's how I first discovered Deer and Gray. That's how a lot of people discovered Deer and Gray. They kind of went towards the erotic grotesque section, and you can find them on YouTube. People who that was like a lot of their first exposure to that band. It was just a band that included lots of blood and vomit, and just body parts. So it was like, what is this? It was a very visual shock, and they wanted to take that to the extreme, and that's kind of the main exposure of a mixture of erotic grotesque in music videos or live performances of some bands.
Just a nice little plug. We're not doing it here because it doesn't really have 18+ programming at this con, but we do have an 18+ VKei panel where we show a lot of crazy videos, talk about crazy stuff. We go more in depth about Edogudo. Are you a fan of any of these more gory bands? I can't imagine.
I like Kaiga.
Oh, really? Yeah, Karigari is, moving on to them, they're the band that pretty much started as a music genre. Let me back up a bit, actually, and mention a bit more Edogudo. It's not, like Tom was mentioning, it's not really like a music genre. It's definitely not just a music genre. It's an art movement. It started in the 1920s, like post World War I, like Japan's modernizing, and there was this idea that like, oh, the nation's like becoming too Western. It's like a decadent thing. And typical Japanese fashion, getting two words, erotic and grotesque, weren't necessarily meaning like sex and gore. It was more like the themes of the words. It was meant to like imply like a decadent, decaying thing. Don't get me wrong, there was definitely like things erotic and grotesque involved, but that wasn't the key thing. And it evolved as an art style. In the 60s, people latched back onto it because we're talking post-World War II, Japan's occupied, there's also some problems with Western powers, and people latched back onto it as a move back to Japan's greater period of like the 20s and 30s when they were modernizing. And once again, people latched onto it in the early 2000s as once again like another art movement where people are like, oh, bring back like some older Japanese elements, be it the art style, and it also ties in with another genre called angurakei. Now angurakei is more like your traditional Japanese type thing. We look a bit more about that in a second. So you see a bit more of that in there. So it's a very important thing to know, and it's a very complicated topic, so it's hard to just cover quickly. Oh, I have it right there. It's a genre style that has its roots in different movement, and yes, it's a very interesting thing. Is anyone familiar with it, like, in general? Yeah, it's a very complicated topic. There's a lot of, like, I remember, like, people have been sharing it. I don't know if it's just my friends, I just have weird friends. But I think there's a couple artists who are really into it right now. People have been sharing all these artworks. I don't know if you've seen me, I share it all the time. But yeah, people keep sharing this. Have you seen them? Go to my personal Facebook, and if you scroll down at a few posts, you'll see all these really cool, I consider them cool, like art, and they're really crazy. And that's Edogudo art. Like, I can't show it here even if I had it, because I really can't show it at an all ages panel. And it's very out there, very crazy, very unique. But yeah, the very interesting point is that a lot of the bands that consider themselves of the Edogudo movement, they don't consider themselves visual kei. But they still kind of like fall under the big umbrella. And as we mentioned earlier, genres are a very tricky thing. Now, Tom here mentioned During Gray, a lot of people get into them. Like, they definitely aren't like an Edogudo band. They're definitely not a VKei band. They're definitely not a lot of things. But they have elements of all this together. I mentioned Mercedes. They formed as that. They had indie success. Yoshiki picked them up at first, produced a few of their singles. They moved to Free Will. They moved to a major label. Free Will still managed them. They toured across Asia, and of course they toured everywhere like there is now. They're amazing. I'm sure you've seen them live, Tom, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them live recently in LA, and like, that show was crazy. There was like moshing like you would not believe, and like, all the friends I were with had to leave the pit because we got too crazy. And their sound is all over the place. And they're one of the few bands who have remained both successful and consistent in terms of like their lineup and their of the second wave of VKei because they came about like after X Japan, after all that. But they really carried forward. But I love that the character was right behind us. But yeah, they carried it forward and they're very, yeah, cool. But even though they are consistent, they have a very consistent lineup. The band members are all involved in other projects. Kyo has another band. Some of the other members are involved in other projects as well. Guitarist. Kato, he's in another band, isn't he, in another project? I believe? Yeah. But they're all in other bands. But they all still release new stuff. I think just yesterday they announced they're coming out with a new single. They have a new look. I love the new look. It's very kind of like, I don't know, because Kyo, the singer, shaved his head recently. It's like, it's very interesting.
Another thing I like about Darren Gray is that they, when they were creating their band name, they decided they wanted to mix different elements of different languages so that their name had no meaning, but you couldn't associate a meaning to it. And one thing I love about this is you can go on Google, you can search Darren Gray, and you're gonna get Darren Gray.
Yes.
Like other bands, they use a name like Scapegoat or Screw, and I can't find any information on them because their names are just too basic. It's like Darren Gray.
That's a very common thing actually, with like basic names.
Yeah.
Funny thing about Darren Gray is like Lauren had a song called Darren Gray, and like it's always confusing to me in my head. I'm like, why do they have a song called Darren Gray? And this is like released long before Darren Gray was around, but so I have no idea like if they had the same idea with like nonsense words. But like, anyways, here are a couple of songs. We look at a very early song, and not a new song, but a song that really defines their shift in sound. I know. I like the only version of the video I can find that stuff. There's only some video we have in this panel. And when we put those two songs together, it's like, how are we the same band?
It's very different.
These are the exact same members, exact same band.
This is later?
Yeah.
Not that much.
Not that much later.
Very 90s. They took a VHS. Oh, okay.
Well, it's meant to be a digest of the July 4. Exactly. I don't know. They both have different things. So yeah, it's like, and they're one of the more recent songs we showed at 18 Plus panel is a song called Oroko, and like they have a mermaid and they're eating it. It's this crazy video, and like and the song itself, it's like his voice. Like sometimes he just like screeches like really high. And it's like such a departure if you listen to like really old stuff. It's like, how is that the same band? It's just, anyway.
And also in that video, you saw some blood in his mouth. Like, that wasn't stage blood. A lot
Yeah.
of times he cuts the inside of his mouth.
Yeah,
And
vicious.
yeah.
He cuts his mouth and like,
Really tried to put on a very shocking show.
That's so metal.
If you go to the 18 Plus panel we have at some point, like, I think we're definitely doing that at Fan Day. We already ran out of time. Go to Fan Day, we're doing the 18 Plus VKei panel. And we have some really cool clips to show, like if people heard themselves on stage. And some of them are very
So metal.
So cool.
no, like I think they like started hiding for life showing or some of them. But
Some of them are pretty bad.
yeah, sorry. So yeah, Miyabi's another very important figure in the early 2000s. I mentioned him earlier about the fan who like stopped liking him because he got married. He was in a band called During the Courts, which I remember when I was young, really young, like in junior high, or actually I don't remember how long ago that was, but they were pretty big. Like, they were one of the bands that I was getting into when I was first getting into Visual Kei, and I thought they were so cool, but nobody knows about them. They're like a footnote of Miyabi's career now. But they're a really cool band. He was in there. He went solo. So when he was in the Indies, he had a very like hard rock punk sound. I don't know how to describe it. Very weird. And then he very quickly like had a more pop sound, and everything he released was acoustic. Even like the more like rock sounding songs still had acoustic elements, and in Copy Boys, but like more important, he had a movement called neo-visualism. It was both like what he called his style, what he called his band style, but it was also kind of what he was calling the new visual kei at the time. Because it was a very, it's without a doubt, you can't really say that the bands of the 2000s were anything like X Japan, anything like Lunacy. It had really moved on. And of course, everyone knows him because he toured the US, he was big in 2000s, and of course, he was in the Angelina Jolie movie as Broken. Did anyone see that? Has anyone seen that?
I've seen it.
I haven't seen
I
it.
had no idea. I was watching it with my parents and I yelled, Miyabi, what? That was
Yeah, like I haven't seen it, but like I remember I had a thing to an advanced screening because we were press and whatnot, and I didn't go and I regret it. But
Was it a good movie?
yeah,
I think it won some awards.
yeah, it was a pretty big movie in terms of like. It wasn't just like, oh, we got a random, like, it wasn't a cheesy movie, so you think that you got a rock star to appear in the movie.
He's like the main antagonist.
Yeah.
Actually, like the main one who's.
Does he speak English?
Yeah, he does speak English.
We should all watch that movie, I haven't seen it.
We should get some clips for the next time.
Yeah. So, you know, are you a fan of Miyagi? Are you, Yeah, I'll be honest, like, I kind of blew through this thing right now, and I kind of like talked a little down about some of this acoustic stuff. I loved him when he was indie. I thought like I was literally like I told you I loved doing the chords, so I was following him when he went solo. And I loved his first 2 albums, but I don't know. I didn't really like where he went after that. And I thought it was very. And another thing about neo-visualism is like when he did his acoustic stuff, he kind of ditched a lot of like his earlier sound and whatnot. So it was kind of a return to visual kei in general. So some people like to break up. By the way. I don't like to do this because I don't think there's as many clear-cut genres as there are like in say rock music or like especially idols, so we can clear-cut that. But a lot of people like to cut up visual kei, and it's like the early period, which is like pretty much X Japan until Hida died. Then what we call the Ice Age, which is after Hida died until about the mid-2000s, and then we have neo-visualism, which is what we have from 2004-ish, which is when Miyagi created it, until more or less today. In case you're curious, that's what some people do. I don't like to do that because I don't think it's that clear cut at all. Because as I mentioned earlier, those bands in the 90s, they were still going around even though like visual kei was dying. It's just a very weird thing. But there's one more big force in the 2000s. Oshada kei. Now a lot of people know this because it was the... Can you explain what Oshada kei is?
Okay, it's like very poppy, very colorful. It's like when you think of like Harajuku, you probably like have an image of someone wearing a Oshada kei kind of clothing. Very, very colorful, very, very calm and bright, and very, very happy, upbeat.
Yeah.
Compared to a lot of other visual kei stuff that has a lot more like darker elements, but it's still part of visual kei.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite.
It's weird how that works, but it does. Like how it's still part of visual kei. We don't talk about kota kei, which is like the old school, like kind of like the old school type genre that like looks back on visual kei, kind of like mimics it. But there's another subgenre called osake, which Tom can explain what that is. Osake, which is like darker oshada, which is like oshada that's like influenced by the.
It's been a year since I did that panel.
But you did the panel, you talked a bit about that. But yeah, they incorporate a lot of pop elements, everything's really colorful. And there are a lot of famous bands. Everyone was on Cafe. Suga, Ayabi, LMC. Now, it's key to point out that all these bands, much like the early VKei bands, I think all of them are still around, but all of them are very different. In terms of some in lineup, some definitely in terms of their style. You want to talk about Nusu versus Zoe?
Oh yeah, like Suggs, their old style was definitely very Oshada kei. Now they took like a year or so hiatus and came back trying to like copy American fashion and change their style, their song style very drastically from being like kind of upbeat to trying to be more sounding very American and trying to look very American. That's kind of weird.
And on Cafe, I don't know, I kind of like the early stuff after Bo left, but they lost a guitarist, and he was replaced by another guitarist and a keyboardist for some reason. and their sound changed too, and like it was a very, I don't know. It did, definitely, by far. But a lot of these bands, I don't know, like, and then of course IABI, like, they changed to all caps IABI, and like, it's, yeah, we actually have a lot of time. We're actually towards the end. But a lot of bands can redefine themselves in Japan in some magic way by changing capitalization. And like, when we did a panel at ALA, and we had a guest, like a Skype guest in that panel. So the manager had to go over the panel we were doing to check everything, you know, make sure something that the person wouldn't want on the panel. So when they were going through it, she was like, "Oh, you have to change that. It's in all caps." And that one, only that and that are capitalized. Everything else has to be lowercase. And they're really hardcore about this. And like somehow bands can change their names by changing capitalizations. I don't understand how that works, but it works in Japan. So we're gonna watch some nice clips. I love this song. Everyone looks so much prettier. I know everyone. Oh my god, I never played that last song. Yes.
Oh, the one with the guitars? Oh my god. Yeah. Okay.
That was really long. But they deserve it. I love both of those songs. Both of those songs are probably my favorite songs by both of those bands.
They sound like Flow.
Flow. That's a very interesting comparison. I'm gonna look at that. What do you think? Do you know what Flow is? That's a very interesting. Yeah, it's a very
more like Flow sounds like that, I think.
Yeah, because definitely that was a much older song. But if you listen to both those bands, they're both very different. We mentioned Akafe went a bit more poppy, and Suga, of course, went more.
There's an Afro dude
An Afro dude. And he's openly gay too. The keyboardist for Akafe, he's openly gay. But anyways, Cycle Shem was one of my favorite bands. Now we talked about cosplay bands. This was another thing that kind of started in the 2000s-ish, where bands definitely incorporated cosplay type elements. They weren't the only ones, but they were pretty. First of all, like a lot of people might know them because they did tour the U.S. They performed. I want to say it was the first AOD. It was either the first or the second. In 2005, 4 or 5. And then, anyways, they performed the first AOD, so they did perform up here. They performed at the first PMX in LA, which is where I saw them. And they performed all over the US for a while. They incorporated cosplay, they also incorporated dance. It's a very interesting thing you'll see in some of the clips. They had costumes that matched the releases, so that means like when they release a new single, they have a new costume. The new costumes were themed, and they all matched, you know, to that theme. Sure, twice they broke up. Now they're involved. First of all, they reformed recently. That picture is actually a very recent one from their reformation tour. They've been in a ton of bands. They're all over the place. Isabel is a very hardcore punk band. Mixed Speakers Inc. is a band that people might know now. They're very similar in terms of sound and look. Dako, Michiru Makulidars, the Romeo 666. The Beethoven is a very awesome current band. They're there. Ninja Man Japan. That's some people know them. Members from they're all over the place. But I love them, and here are two awesome songs. Prism is interesting because H. Naoto designed their costumes.
Oh.
And as you see the dance that they incorporated. Or, you know, the kata type, you know, like. And you don't see as much cosplay in this song, but I love it. This is probably like one of my favorite songs of all time, period. I love this song. But even have this weird angel look, I thought that was such a good one. But Pete will always be the monster in the basement.
I like on point.
So it has this the artificially on the bottom with the horn and like this costume is awesome. Yeah, I love this costume. If anyone is a fan, if anyone see like more current things like that, there's a band called Mixed Speakers Inc. and he does the crazy costumes there too. It's just like over the top. But there are lots of bands in the 2000s. Popular culture K, this used the term visual K because we had a lot more subgenres. Bands that use traditional elements that we call angara, and lots of indie bands. And arguably, there's way more visual K bands today than ever were before. We were talking earlier about like looking at a magazine like here, and you open it up, and there's like a band. There's always ads. And there's like ad pages where there's like 40 bands, and you've never heard these names, and it's just like there's just tons of bands. Before we move on to some other current ones we're talking about, let's watch a clip of some other 2000 ones that are worth mentioning. This is that's Kisaki right there playing bass. You can tell how much of a diva he is. They show him more in the video than anyone else. They also toured the US. They toured the US a lot. I think they were at Anime Expo 2004. That has before you later. And Kisaki has come by himself several times. And this is Mixed Speakers Inc., by the way. But this is kind of like their odd pseudo Ashade type, single. If you're like paying attention to some of the members of the type of single right here. And they're famous to get two vocalists. VKei has the guitarist Izaki, who's famous in his own right for being solo, and also because he is like the most I don't know how you can not see him as a woman. Like he does it perfectly. It's amazing. But yeah, it's definitely a guy, and it's awesome. He's amazing. He's an amazing guitarist. His solo albums are usually guitar only. And like you listen to them, and it's just really amazing. He's one of my favorite guitarists of all time. But we have some other current visual K bands we're gonna talk about. Before we talk about that, we're talking about like some of the new bands that are around and some of the new elements. Now VKei is always kind of like borrowed heavily from other genres, so to speak. Like we mentioned in X Japan days, they covered the thrash type thing. Now you can kind of say they cover some of the hardcore emo screamer elements. How would you say some of some of the elements that incorporate are? What do you think some of the newer ones are?
I think a lot of the newer bands definitely are more the heavier style, like a lot more screaming and yelling.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a lot of new soft bands, but I think like Meiji Bray, like they had some really heavy sounds, but then also like a lot of it's like all bands. They just kind of cover all different bases to get the wide fan base, but like I said, a lot of the hardcore screamo stuff in a lot of these bands.
How do you feel about the hardcore screamo stuff you hear in VKei today?
It's alright. I'm not too much of a fan of the screaming. I'm like, oh, okay, that was loud. Okay.
Yeah, like I'm kind of admit too. Like I'm not either. There's a band we showed a minute called Arlequin. Now all the clips I show of them are actually I only have one clip in this panel. But all the clips I show of them show like the singing side, but he also screams. And there are times where I listen to the song and I'm like, that song would be better if he didn't scream there. Don't get me wrong, I love that aesthetic. I listen to a lot of bands that have that, but for some reason I don't feel it in visual K as much as you would think I would. But there's lots of new bands, and there's lots of new things that make it up. The look is very different. Makeup and hair have, you either got the more toned down look or you got the look that's, I don't know, how would you describe the VKei look today? It's kind of hard to like pinpoint it.
It is very hard to pinpoint.
Yeah, like
the makeup is very specific. Like they all have very, very similar looking like eye makeup. And intense hair going on.
Going in the idea we mentioned about the visual thing, that's really how you tell a VKei band today, is like the look. But well, there's a key thing, I want to move on to the bands before we run out of time, but the relevance of visual kei is that a lot of people mention how these are, how VKei is not really a dominant genre anymore. Like I had a really sad interview with a band, I won't talk about all the stuff in the interview, this like kind of other stuff, but a really sad interview with the band. Actually I had 2 interviews recently where 2 bands mentioned how they do shows in Japan and nobody goes to them. And I'm like, and I really shouldn't name the names, so I'm not going to, but these are big bands, and if I mention their names, you'd be like, what? Nobody went to them? And yeah, like they mentioned they did a show and like 3 people went, and like they did a show and 10 people went. But they play in the US and people go. So yeah, it's a very odd thing. And then of course you play in the US and people go, but nobody here really buys your music because it's a different economy in Japan, which mentions the music market. In Japan, they're still very CD driven, but here nobody buys CDs. So it's kind of hard to do that. And they're very big on the concert culture. Now that means a lot of these bands make money by actually doing concerts. And things are usually more expensive in Japan. You go to a concert here for a similar level, and a concert ticket will probably be $10 or $15 for like the level you get in the club. But you go to Japan, these same tickets are like 20 or 30 comparatively, interchange rates. So, and there's, like I said, there's a lot of people going to concerts that are here. So it's a whole different dynamic in terms of the music. But a lot of these bands do survive because a lot of them are able to be exposed in the West. They do cons, they do standalone shows, and so on. And yeah, so there's a big focus on the new, not so much the old school type thing. So moving on to a couple of current bands. We'll just put all these up here right now. Kiryu is a band that like kind of defines, well there's several others, but the Angara thing, which is a bit more the old school aesthetic, traditional Japanese elements in a modern setting, to nostalgic is like their slogan, so to speak. They have a very cool, unique look and fashion, which is very old school type things. Gok is one of their famous designers that designs things for them. And they have an alter ego band called My Dragon. And yeah, Heidi loves, are you familiar? Because I know you listen to Kiryu, right?
Yeah. I haven't researched much into their ultimate band, but I do know that what's interesting about Kiryu is that Kiryu is usually written with a certain Japanese kanji, but they mix together kanjis that actually relate to My Dragon.
Yeah.
So when I showed it to someone from Japan, he's like, that's weird. That I wouldn't read that as Kiryu, but he told me it's read as Kiryu, and now I get it. But so it's kind of like their play on words with their band.
Which is how they're able to name My Dragon. My Dragon is basically an idol group. It is an idol group. I show the chorus here. Actually, I'll play it and we'll talk a bit after. But like, first we're gonna see Kiryu and then we're gonna see My Dragon. They're the same band.
Alright.
Those covering. This is the same band. And they all sing. Really? Isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, I love My Dragon. Yeah, I remember.
Your dragon loves you too.
No, I mean, there's a store I go to that sells, like imports visual kei CDs in LA, and I went there and there was they were doing an event where they were selling all this Kiryu stuff they had imported, And the guy who was running it, he knows me. He's like, man, you're gonna really love this group. They're called Mind Dragon. At the time, they just released like their second single. He's like, check it out, they're an idol group, and it's key to you. And I'm like, what? And like, yeah, it obviously is as crazy as it sounds. If you listen to the whole song, it's cool because they all take turns singing like an idol group. So it's really weird hearing them sing, especially because most of them don't sing. Actually, none of them sing. But yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. So. I'll let Heidi take over for this part.
Yeah, this is my favorite band. They're pretty well known for, they did openings for Black Butler, they did some songs for Full Metal Alchemist, they've done some songs for Magi, they've changed sound as they went from like indie to major, and they kind of have a more toned down adult visual kei, is what they call it. Yeah, they're really cool. They have lots of different kinds of sounds within their songs.
We didn't talk about it at this panel, but there's a very big thing in Japan. When you do a song as a theme song, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be a big hit, and that you're going to both you and the song. So as Heidi mentioned, they do a lot of anime songs, so they're like very high, on the radar. And yeah. And like I think they did like the 28th opening for Naruto Shippuden. No, they did one of them. Was it Bleach? But like I just like making that like everyone's done an opening for Naruto Shippuden. There's like 40, there's like 60 openings, I swear. No, I thought it was a joke. A friend of mine wrote an article for us and he's like, oh yeah, this band is famous for writing the 42nd. And I'm like, you're joking, right? He's like, no, they're really like, and that wasn't the last one. And I'm like, I thought he was joking. He was making a joke, like there've been so many. He's like, no, there's been more than that. I thought he was joking. Yeah, just crazy stuff. Like, anyways, that's a topic for another panel.
Oh, alright.
Like, I like where this is going.
I did not expect to say that out loud.
You serious? What the hell? Oh my god, we should go with your mom to karaoke. Yeah. Is he serious? The common Joshi experience? I know, he knows that. Oh, Dime's here. Oh, really?
A bunch of bands were there for the panel.
They're an awesome band.
They were all invited to cover Mussolini because it's one of their most famous songs. There are a bunch of visual kei bands and then Common Joshi.
I know, like, why is Common Joshi there?
Because I don't know. But,
But I don't know if you saw, but there were girls on stage. They're an idol group called Common Joshi, and like, why are they there? It was like, yeah.
Like the band members themselves like chose their bands that they wanted to hear like put a twist on their own songs. So.
Are the Queen is one of my favorite current bands. They're definitely one of the rising bands in the scene today. I love Aki, their vocals. I love his voice. And I love the way they sound together. Now they're the band I mentioned earlier that he screams a lot of the songs, or especially the early songs. They're doing newer singles which have less screaming. But there's so many songs I listen to and I'm like, that was so awesome if he wasn't screaming. So here's one of their more new, I think this is 2 singles ago. One of the recent songs. Everyone makes fun of him because he doesn't care. Like people are like, I know people are like, it's not awesome, I can get scared. An animal? But yeah, I I'll admit, like, I love him so much I look past that, but the hair is kind of like comical if you're not expecting it.
It's supposed to be like a curl.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's supposed to be.
Oh, I thought this was supposed to be like Foxy.
Yeah.
Fox ears? That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. But yeah, yeah, they're an amazing band. You should check them out. Another really cool current band is a band called Roy's. They had a lineup change recently. Their genres are kind of all over the place as well. Really awesome band, really cool. Watch a clip at the beginning here. This is one of the more recent singles. See, the problem with talking about a lot of these current bands and trying to make a segment for them is that we're kind of still in this period. So it's kind of hard to define what's going on right now in music, especially with VKei, because like I said, we're still in this period. And it's kind of a clearly defining mark from about 2010 to now, definitely. But it's hard to pinpoint like what sound changes are there, what look changes are there. I think there's definitely a lot more black. There's definitely a lot more darker elements, even if it's not the sound. There's definitely a lot more darker elements in terms of the look and the feel, for a better term, of the bands. Yeah. So yeah, that's why we're kind of just throwing bands at you at the end here, because it's hard to put these bands into like how they cohesively make up in VKei. And maybe that's something to talk about. That's kind of new VKei. As like, it's not really a cohesive thing right now in the 2010s. Diarra is definitely one of the biggest current VKei bands. One of the others is Mejibre. Mejibre are a bit more indie. Do you like Mejibre?
Mejibre is like one of those bands that have like 2 or 3 songs I'm in love with, and then other songs I just repulsed by.
Are you familiar with Mejibre?
Yeah.
Do you like them?
There's some, yeah, like what he said, there's some songs that sound alright.
I like their aesthetic.
Yeah. I think that we're all in the same boat here, which is one of the reasons I don't personally like talk about them as a panelist and I don't like them much. And I'm actually confused by this, because a lot of my friends don't like them either. But I'm like, who likes them? No, because like people have to. So I'm like, who likes them? I'm confused. But they are definitely, mind you, they're super indie. Diarra isn't. Diarra's on a major label. They perform Budokan. They do all these big shows. But Mejibre is a bit more, like, actually not a bit more. They're very indie. But they're definitely one of the big defining bands of the period right now. It's almost like a crime that I'm not talking about them. But it's just that, like, I don't know much about them, I don't like them, but they're definitely at the forefront. But if you want to talk about 2 big bands, it's Mejibre and Diarra. So we're going to talk about Diarra. Diarra, like I mentioned, their sound is very, I don't know, because they have their ballad periods, they sound very old school VKei. Then they have songs that are a bit more like, almost even like borderline Mejibre sound in terms of like, the harsh, kind of almost unproduced mix they like to do. That's the thing about Mejibre, is that a lot of their songs sound like they were, like, and I'm sure it's intentional, but they sound like they were recorded in a basement and people were mixing them, like making them sound all kind of muddy. And it sounds intentional, but it sounds weird nonetheless. But anyways, we'll watch a clip of Diarra. I think there's definitely a sound in the vocal style of like kind of blood I'm not gonna lie, when I wrote this panel, It's like 70 slides, 68 slides. And I didn't think there was any way we were gonna get through it. I thought and I cut out a ton of stuff before we came here, but we finished. The future of Visual Kei. Visual Kei has a very. Visual Kei is the genre that will pretty much never die. I feel because like it always reinvents itself. Now whether or not you can still call it Visual Kei is a very hard question to answer because there's people like Kenzie, like from Kamitachi, one of the very early bands, who says that Visual Kei doesn't exist anymore because the bands have changed so drastically from when he was around. And definitely, you can't look at Diora, look at Lunacy, and say that those two are anything like each other. But somehow they are, because of Visual Kei. So it's just the magic of Visual Kei. So yeah, with that, sorry, I didn't turn. Okay, with that, thank you all for coming. We're going to be at VKei Con definitely next. We're doing 101. We're doing 101 there, this panel, with a different version. And then we're doing our 18 plus panel, which will be a lot of fun. You really should come to that. We're redoing it. I think it'll be the same three of us here, so it'll be a lot of fun, hopefully. Maybe hopefully the three of us. It'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully the three of us will be here. So AJKennews.com for more news, Visual Kei updates, we do a lot of cool stuff. Talk to us. I didn't have a question slide, but if you have questions, feel free to come up while we're cleaning up. And follow social media. And yeah, we do panels every week. So check us out. Nor Carolina still comes. Thank you all for coming. I know, that's like a big thing.